Good evening. This week, several reports have come out which show the devastating side effects that the pandemic lockdowns are having on society. For instance, over in the UK, a new report found that due to the dramatic decrease in the number of face-to-face doctor visits since the start of the pandemic, there may be as many as 10,000 unnecessary deaths due to cancer. Likewise, here in America, the CDC just released a new report which found that after the lockdowns, and more specifically after the nationwide school closures, childhood obesity has skyrocketed. Meanwhile, over in New York, as the vaccine mandates are set to go into effect very soon, with tens of thousands of hospital workers about to lose their jobs, well, the governor came out and she offered a solution. She suggested that the state of New York can import foreigners to work in hospitals. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. And now I would like to begin today's discussion by mentioning that the Arizona audit, the final report from that audit, is about to be released. However, we are filming this episode on Friday afternoon, and as of right now, the Arizona State Senate has not held their hearing, and I do not have the final report in hand yet. I see there's a draft floating around out there, but the final report is not yet available. However, very likely by Monday, I'll have everything in hand and we can talk about it then. In fact, I even interviewed Ms. Karen Fan, who is the Arizona Senate President, and we discussed all the implications of the audit as well as the parts of the audit which might still occur even after the final report has been released. And so look out for that episode early next week, likely on Monday. Otherwise, let's start today's discussion over in the UK, where some very sad findings have recently been published. Specifically, earlier this week, this report came out from the University College of London, and according to this report, the researchers found that because of the dramatic decrease in the number of face-to-face doctor visits, specifically since the start of the pandemic, there may be as many as 10,000 unnecessary deaths due to cancer. Let me just repeat that. According to this report, because so many people are no longer actually going for in-person doctor visits, as many as 10,000 unnecessary deaths from cancer might be the result. Now, you might be asking yourself, how is that so? Well, there are two factors that the researchers found. The first factor is that across the UK, they saw a dramatic drop in the number of emergency referrals from general practitioners, and according to their findings, this resulted in about 40,000 diagnoses of cancer coming later than they should have. And then the second factor that these researchers cited in this report was that the National Health Service, or the NHS, that's the large health service over in the UK, they experienced general delays in the treatments that they provided to cancer patients, which this report said was due to the pandemic. And so when you combine these two factors, delayed diagnoses as well as the delayed treatment, well, unfortunately, according to these researchers, they say that this means that thousands will die significantly earlier from cancer than they otherwise would have. Here's in fact what one of the co-authors of this report said in a statement to London's Telegraph. The immediate effect of the pandemic was to delay early diagnosis. There is some evidence to suggest every month treatment is delayed can increase the risk of early death by 7%. Some of it is about patients not presenting, worrying about being a burden on their general practitioner. Some of it is about access problems. And specifically, in regards to people worrying about being a burden on their doctor, this report found that approximately 60% of people who were surveyed by this university, they were concerned about talking to their general practitioners about minor health problems amid the pandemic. Furthermore, before the pandemic, about 80% of doctor appointments were done in person. However, this number went all the way down to 57% during the month of July. Now, why specifically were so many people more weary to go to the doctor? You might assume that it's just out of their goodwill. They didn't want to burden their local hospital, who they assume were flooded with COVID cases, right? However, according to a separate study that was conducted back in October of last year, they found that that was not completely the case. In that earlier report, they found that it was actually the National Health Services, the NHS's own messaging, that kept people from going there. Specifically, that report that, again, came out all the way back in October, it found that when the NHS told the local residents that they should stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, well, that scared away patients who were seeking medical attention. They didn't go to the NHS and they instead stayed home. And so that earlier, though, again, that report that was conducted all the way back in October, it predicted that we would see a spike in cancer deaths. Here's in fact what the director behind that report, here's what he said last year. Overall, the analysis suggests that the long-term effects of the pandemic are likely to be far-reaching, with a future spike in demand possible due to misdiagnoses and postponed procedures. Cancers may now require a greater level of treatment or even be untreatable if they have been left undetected or untreated as a result of the crisis. And unfortunately, that speculation, made again all the way last year, unfortunately appears to be correct, since it was just recently reaffirmed by this new report, which just came out earlier this week, from researchers who found that there may be as many as 10,000 unnecessary deaths due to cancer. Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we reached out to the NHS for comment on this report as well as the earlier report, but we have yet to hear back. However, these reports do shed light on a very important issue, and it's something that typically escapes the national or even the international discussion about the lockdowns, as well as the different pandemic measures that have been enacted over the last 2 years now. Because these lockdowns have unintended consequences that, again, are just often brushed under the rug and not discussed. And along that line, let's move back to America and discuss a separate report which was just released by the CDC. And according to this report, it shows that because of the lockdowns, as well as the social isolation, childhood obesity has skyrocketed. Specifically, this report, it examined over 432,000 adolescents who were aged between 2 years old and 19 years old, and the results were, frankly, quite stark. The CDC found that children had nearly doubled their BMI, their body mass index scores, since the start of the pandemic. Let me just reiterate that. This report found that American children have nearly doubled their BMI scores during the period of the lockdown. Here's specifically what this report found. Quote, among a cohort of 432,302 persons aged between 2 and 19 years of age, the rate of body mass index increase approximately doubled during the pandemic compared to a pre-pandemic period. Now, as to the exact reason behind this weight increase, well, here's what the report says. Quote, the COVID-19 pandemic led to school closures, disrupted routines, increased stress, and less opportunity for physical activity and proper nutrition, leading to weight gain among children and adolescents. Furthermore, the CDC in this report said that school closures might have reduced the possibility of children engaging in physical activity. Here's what the report says, quote, during the pandemic, many early child care and education settings and schools experienced closures, leading to online or hybrid learning environments. This might have reduced the ability for some children to engage in structured physical activity and receive healthy meals. Now, this unintended consequence of school lockdowns is unfortunately ironic, you could say. That's because if the intention is to keep kids safe from the virus, then creating a situation where they become fatter is fairly counterproductive. That's because there is a well-established connection between being overweight and getting hospitalized for COVID. In fact, according to a separate report by the CDC, they found that the vast majority, 78% of U.S. patients who were hospitalized with COVID were either overweight or they had obesity. Let me just repeat that. 78% of Americans who were hospitalized with COVID were either overweight or they were obese. Here's an excerpt from that earlier study. Among 148,000 U.S. adults with COVID, a nonlinear relationship was found between body mass index, BMI, and COVID-19 severity. Overweight and obesity were risk factors for invasive mechanical ventilation. Obesity was a risk factor for hospitalization and death, particularly among adults aged under 65 years old. And so, at the moment, many people call this a pandemic of the unvaccinated, but given numbers like these, there's also a case to be made for calling it a pandemic of the overweight. And sadly, according to this new report from the CDC, due to these lockdowns, many kids have actually doubled their BMI index scores and, unfortunately, in that case, increased their risk for severe COVID cases. If you'd like to read these reports for yourself, either the one from the NHS or the one from the CDC, I'll throw them all into the description box below this video so that you can comb through them for yourself. And all I ask in return is that you take a quick second to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now let's move on over to New York and discuss how the governor recently announced that foreigners may soon move in and replace unvaccinated American nurses. Oh, sorry. What's this? That's a great question, Roman, and it is today's sponsor, which is an awesome messaging app called Secure. And it's awesome if you actually care about your privacy, because it's not a big secret that our data is being mined and remined by all these big tech companies. And in the year 2020, over 155 million Americans, likely including you and me, were affected by data breaches. And by the way, that's only what's publicly known. However, with Secure, all that stuff that happened in the past, it's in the past because your emails and messages moving forward can remain private. That's because They have their servers and data centers located right here in Kabul, Afghanistan. No, I'm just kidding. They actually have their data centers and servers here in Switzerland. Now, why does that matter? Well, Switzerland has some of the strictest data privacy laws in the entire world, and they're not subject to the Cloud Act. And if you want to know what that is, head on over to secure.com under their FAQ section, and they explain exactly what that is. Now, the thing that I love most about them is that they don't collect your phone number, they don't collect your private data, they don't mine your data, they don't collect the phone numbers of your friends and family. Instead, everything is private. And best of all, if your friends and family don't use the Secure app, it doesn't matter, because the way it works is all your messages are still routed through Switzerland and everything remains private almost no matter what. So head on over to secure.com and use promo code Roman to get 25% off. And the rates aren't even that expensive to start with. It's only $5 for the Messenger and $10 for the email and Messenger combo. And they offer a 7-day free trial. So head on over to secure.com, use promo code Roman to get 25% off, and now Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's move on over to New York. In case you don't know, the vaccine mandate, which is being imposed on healthcare workers in the state of New York, it's about to go into effect. Specifically, starting on September the 27th, so in about 2 or 3 days from now, workers at both healthcare facilities as well as nursing homes could lose their jobs if they refuse to get the shot. Now, a federal judge has extended that deadline all the way to October the 12th due to a religious exemption lawsuit that's currently making its way through the court system. However, regardless whether it's going to be next week or 2 weeks from now, the writing is frankly on the wall. Unvaccinated healthcare workers in the state of New York are about to face the very real possibility of losing their jobs. And the number of workers that this affects is not small by any stretch of the imagination. According to governor data, as of today, here in New York, 84% of hospital workers, 85% of adult care facility workers, and 83% of the nursing home staff, they have been fully vaccinated. Now, of course, that is the majority. However, let's take a moment and take a look at it from the flip side. For instance, in New York, there are 450,000 hospital workers. 84% of them are fully vaccinated, meaning that 16% of them are not. And when you do the math, that means that 72,000 workers are facing termination when this vaccine mandate goes into effect. And that's, by the way, only from hospitals. That doesn't even include adult care facilities and nursing homes. And it also doesn't include the fact that even prior to all this, there was a general shortage of nurses as well as healthcare workers in general. Regardless, here is what New York's governor, Ms. Kathy Hochul, New York's new governor, here's what she said in a statement. To all the healthcare providers, doctors and nurses in particular who are vaccinated, I say thank you, because you are keeping true to your oath. To those who won't, we will be replacing people. And so, you might look at this current situation and you might ask yourself, well, who is exactly going to be replacing all these people? And that is a great question. And according to New York's governor, she said that the answer to that question lies outside of our borders. That's because part of her plan is to bring in foreigners to fill these positions. Here's specifically what she said during an interview with Spectrum News. We're also reaching out to the Department of State to find out about visas for foreign workers on a limited basis to bring more nurses over here. People who will not get vaccinated are the only reason that this country and these communities and our cities have not been able to be fully engaged in a state of normalcy. It's kind of amazing when you think about it how prior to the vaccine's availability, these healthcare workers were heralded as heroes and there were even parades in their honor. And now those same workers are being potentially replaced by foreigners. Regardless, we are already starting to see the effects of some of these vaccine mandates here in New York at least. For instance, over in a hospital in upstate New York, so many employees from a maternity ward decided to leave that the hospital had to literally stop delivering babies. They are in fact still trying to fill those empty slots, and at the moment that hospital is not delivering babies. Likewise, a hospital over in Erie County, New York, they said that they're anticipating that around 400 of their staff members will choose to not take the vaccine and instead leave. And this looming shortage, it has led that hospital to advise the local community to seek treatment at urgent care centers or at other medical facilities because they just don't have space at the hospital. Here's in fact what the chief operating officer for that particular hospital over in Erie County, here's what he had to say. It's hard to discharge people out of the facility since the nursing homes and group homes also have shortages. We have about 30 patients requiring alternative levels of care. They shouldn't be in our setting, but we have placement issues and can go to other places. So that's causing this backlog as well as the mandate that's coming up. And frankly, as the vaccine mandates go into full effect across the entire state, you can likely expect to see more of this type of situation playing out across many different hospitals in the state within the next few weeks and definitely within the next few months. However, let's take a moment and circle back and discuss the question of religious exemptions. Because as it currently now stands, this New York statewide mandate, it does not have any exemption for people who hold a religious objection to the vaccine, which, as you can imagine, is upsetting to many religious believers here in the state of New York. Specifically, many Christians, they object to the fact that during the research and development of these mRNA vaccines, they employed fetal cell lines, which are cells grown in a laboratory, but they are derived from aborted fetuses. And in fact, as we mentioned just a few moments ago, that lawsuit that's currently working its way through the federal court system, the one that delayed the enforcement of these vaccine mandates by several weeks, it's tackling exactly this issue. However, the New York governor, Ms. Kathy Hochul, she seems to have a different take on the matter. Here's what she said in a recent statement just earlier this month. To the extent that there's leadership of different religious organizations that have spoken, and they have, I'm not aware of a sanctioned religious exemption from any organized religion. In fact, they're encouraging the opposite. They're encouraging their members, everybody from the Pope on down, is encouraging people to get vaccinated, so people will say what they choose. And her statement actually touches on a very critical matter in this discussion, which is the question of how do you exactly prove to the government that you have a sincere religious conviction against this vaccine? Because under the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, American employers may be required to accommodate their workers' sincerely held religious beliefs, including potential religious objections to a vaccine. However, just as Ms. Kathy Hochul mentioned in that statement, what happens if the church, or let's say the Pope, says that the vaccine is fine, but according to your own personal faith, it's not? Well, how do you prove that to the government? And furthermore, do you even have to prove that to the government? Well, according to the president of a nonprofit organization called CatholicVote.org, he told the Daily Caller that the federal government has no authority to tell Americans what they can or cannot believe when it comes to religious exemptions to vaccinations. He further stated that there appears to be a stark juxtaposition between two different messages being sent to religious Americans. Here's what he said. On the one hand, we've been told that religious organizations should limit themselves to the four walls of their churches. Yet today, we are faced with the prospect of government bureaucrats dictating to religious groups what they are allowed to believe. He further emphasized that politicians, they're not moral theologians and have no business inserting themselves into the decisions of religious organizations or religious individuals. And just as a quick addendum, and also a good example of what this actually looks like in practice, we here at the Epoch Times, we obtained a memo that was sent out to Coast Guard chaplains about the questions that they should be asking the sailors. And frankly, they are pretty invasive in regards to their religious faith. Here is what this memo that was again sent out to Coast Guard chaplains, here's what it says, quote, have the member describe how they consistently keep the tenets of their faith and demonstrate those in their daily life. Ask them to be as specific as possible. Put the specific acts or lack thereof in the memo. It is important to provide context in the memo discussing the member's belief. If they come to the meeting and begin by discussing concerns about safety, politics, etc., note that in the memo. Now, in regards to this memo, we also spoke to a civil liberties attorney. He was an attorney with the First Liberty Institute, which is a nonprofit based out of Texas that specializes in defending religious freedom. And they said that these questions aren't actually legal. The questions that the U.S. Coast Guard is asking the sailors, they're not legal. Here's what this lawyer told us, quote, almost none of the questions in that memo are appropriate, although some are certainly more inflammatory and offensive than others. The only obligation the service member has is to establish that they have a sincerely held religious belief that is being substantially burdened by the government. Once they show that, the burden shifts entirely to the government. The government has no authority and no legitimate basis to ask the sorts of questions that are in the memo, and it demonstrates overt hostility to religious beliefs. If you'd like to read his full statements for yourself, I'll throw that along with several articles pertaining to the New York mandate into the description box below this video for you to check out. And now that you've finished this episode of Facts Matter, I would highly recommend that you head on over to Epoch TV and check out an awesome episode of Crossroads where Josh sat down with Gordon Chang and discussed how China is building a bioweapon that can target people based on their race. Here's a trailer for that episode.
This could end up leaving China as the world's only viable civilization.
What is the state of the Chinese Communist Party's biological warfare programs?
One that concerns me the most is their program to develop pathogens to attack specific ethnic groups. And that's why I talk about a civilization killer, because all non-Chinese would be either sickened or killed by this. Remember, China has been collecting DNA profiles of foreigners. The largest collection of DNA profiles of Americans, for instance, is not in America, it's in China. We should be concerned about the DNA profile of every American because China can develop diseases that will hobble our society.
If you want to check out that episode as well as the other awesome content over on Epoch TV, I'll throw a link to that. It'll be right there at the top of the description box. I hope you click on it. I hope you check it out. I hope you subscribe. And I hope that you join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. Now, lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, hit that notification bell so you can actually be notified of any new videos as we release them. And then lastly, if you have an Instagram account, I would suggest that you follow me at Epoch Times Roman. I post behind-the-scenes research as well as spicy memes. And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.